There is a profound difference between a man who constantly shouts about his wealth and a man who carries the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders. For years, my own flesh and blood looked down on me because I chose a path of service rather than chasing material luxury. They mistook my silence for failure and my modest lifestyle for a lack of ambition. Before we dive into how a single sentence at a dinner table completely shattered their arrogance, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Your support helps us bring more incredible, true-to-life stories, just like this one, to the channel. Family gatherings were always a battleground of vanity, where my relatives measured human worth by the price tags on their clothes. I always showed up in my faded canvas jacket and parked my battered old truck far away from their shiny new European sports cars. To them, my quiet demeanor meant I was struggling, and they never missed an opportunity to throw subtle shade my way. If you believe that true success cannot be bought with money, drop a comment below and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Remember to leave a like to help spread this message. My journey started right out of high school, when I walked away from the family business mindset and enlisted in the Army. I later transitioned into the Air Force, finding a sense of purpose that a corporate paycheck could never provide. In the military, you quickly learn that true power does not need to scream for attention. I spent over a decade operating advanced aircraft that the general public only reads about in top-secret files or sees in heavily classified documentaries. My life was defined by long missions and heavy responsibilities, where the cost of a single mistake was measured in human lives. The relentless mockery reached an absolute boiling point during a formal dinner celebrating my sister's engagement to a high-powered corporate executive named Brandon. Brandon was a man who loved the sound of his own voice and wore his wealth like a badge of absolute honor. As the wine flowed, the conversation naturally turned into an arrogant boasting contest about real estate portfolios and offshore investments. Eventually, my uncle turned his judgmental gaze toward my side of the table and asked what I was doing with my life these days. I calmly replied that I was still proudly serving my country. A wave of condescending chuckles rippled across the expansive dining table as my relatives exchanged pitiful glances. Someone whispered that it must be tragic to still be scraping by on a government salary at my age. Another relative loudly joked that they should probably cover the cost of my dessert, since my military stipend probably could not afford it. I simply took a sip of water and remained completely silent, refusing to let their ignorance break my composure. They had absolutely no idea about the places I had been or the immense trust that the government had placed in my hands. Just as the teasing began to die down, Brandon leaned back in his leather chair and fixed his eyes directly on me with a strange expression. He mentioned that he had recently returned from an international corporate trip that required a specialized military chartered flight through a secure airbase. Brandon explained that while he was waiting in the high-security terminal, he happened to overhear a group of high-ranking officers discussing my exact name. The entire table suddenly grew incredibly quiet as Brandon leaned forward, his previous smug attitude completely replaced by genuine confusion and a hint of real respect. Brandon looked around the room and stated that the airfield personnel told him one of the massive jets on the tarmac belonged to me. A nervous laugh escaped my aunt, who assumed Brandon was just making a sophisticated joke at my expense. However, Brandon quickly shook his head and insisted he was being completely serious about what he had witnessed. He explained that the officers explicitly told him that a long-range strategic military aircraft was exclusively assigned to my command. My relatives sat frozen in their seats, their faces turning pale as they tried to process this unbelievable piece of information. Choose not to correct his specific wording, because the absolute truth was far more profound than their superficial minds could comprehend. I did not own the multi-million-dollar aircraft, but I was the sole individual trusted to pilot it through dangerous airspace during critical national security operations. The atmosphere in the dining room shifted dramatically as my family looked at me with an intense level of recalculation. I quietly told them that I did not own the jet, but I commanded it whenever our nation required my specific skills. No one at the table laughed after that revelation, and the previous condescending whispers completely vanished into the heavy silence. My family did not suddenly burst into applause or offer a tearful apology for the years of cruel mockery I had endured. However, a visible wave of understanding washed over every single person sitting around that expansive dinner table. They finally realized that true success is not always visible to the naked eye, and some of the most powerful people in the world operate completely in the shadows. I ended up leaving that family dinner exactly the same way I had arrived, driving away quietly in my reliable old truck. My financial situation had not changed, and I still wore the same faded jacket, but the dynamic of my family was altered forever. For the first time in my adult life, my relatives no longer mistook my chosen silence for personal failure. True worth is never measured by the flashy things you display to the world, but rather by the immense responsibilities you are trusted to carry.